The scream that tore through the afternoon air made Gideon Wade drop his hammer mid-swing. The echo of metal against wood silenced by something far more urgent than repairing fence posts. He straightened from his work, sweat trickling down his spine under the Missouri sun, and turned toward the cluster of buildings that made up Independence in this year of 1867. The town sat at the edge of civilization, a jumping-off point for wagon trains heading west, and it attracted every kind of person, good and bad alike. Gideon had seen enough of both in his 26 years to know when trouble was brewing, and the sound of a woman's terror cut through him like a blade. He moved quickly toward Main Street, his long legs eating up the dusty ground between his property and the center of town. The afternoon heat shimmered off the packed earth, making the buildings waver like mirages, but the commotion ahead was real enough. A cluster of men stood outside the boarding house, their voices raised in angry demands. Gideon recognized two of them, drifters who had rolled into Independence 3 days ago with money to spend and meanness in their eyes. The third man he did not know, but the way he stood with his hand resting on his gun belt told Gideon everything he needed to know about his character. As Gideon approached, he caught fragments of their conversation. They were demanding someone come out, threatening to break down the door if she did not show herself. The boarding house owner, Mrs. Chen, stood on her porch wringing her hands, clearly caught between protecting her guest and avoiding trouble with these rough men. Gideon had always liked Mrs. Chen. She had come to Independence with her late husband 15 years ago, and after he died, she had turned their home into a respectable boarding house that catered to families and single women traveling through. "She owes us nothing, Mrs. Chen was saying, her accented English firm despite the tremor in her voice. "You leave now, or I call the marshal." The tallest of the three men, a scarred brute with tobacco-stained teeth, laughed. "Marshal's out of town, old woman. Everyone knows he rode to Kansas City yesterday. Now tell that little thief to come out here and face what she did." Gideon cleared his throat as he stepped onto the wooden walkway. "Seems like there is a misunderstanding here, gentlemen." All three men turned to look at him. Gideon stood 6 feet 2 inches in his worn boots, with shoulders broadened by years of ranch work, and a steady gaze that had stared down more than a few troublemakers. His dark hair was overlong, curling at his collar, and his face bore the weathered tan of a man who spent his days under the open sky. He kept his hands loose at his sides, non-threatening but ready. "This is not your concern, Cowboy," the scarred man said, spitting into the dirt near Gideon's feet. "When men threaten a woman in my town, it becomes my concern," Gideon replied evenly. "Now, I am sure whatever dispute you think you have can be settled peacefully. Why do not you tell me what this is about?" The second man, shorter and rounder with a patchy beard, pointed an accusatory finger toward the boarding house. "That woman in there stole from us. We had money on the table at the saloon last night, and after she walked past, it was gone. She is a thief, and we want our money back." Gideon glanced at Mrs. Chen, who shook her head firmly. "Miss Willa was never in the saloon. She arrived yesterday afternoon, paid for a week in advance, and has been in her room since. She is a respectable young woman, not the kind who goes into saloons." "That is a lie," the third man snarled. He was younger than the others, maybe 22 or 23, with wild eyes that suggested he had been drinking already despite the early hour. "I saw her with my own eyes. Dark hair, pretty face, wearing a green dress. She walked right past our table. Could have been any woman," Gideon said. "Independence has plenty of dark-haired women. What makes you so certain it was Mrs. Chen's guest?" "Because we followed her back here. That is why," the scarred man said. "Watched her go right through that door." Now she is going to come out and give us back what she took, or we are going in to get it." Gideon felt his jaw tighten. These men were not interested in justice. They were looking for an excuse to terrorize a woman, possibly to rob her or worse. He had seen their type before, men who drifted from town to town leaving misery in their wake. "You are not going anywhere near that door," he said quietly. "If you have a legitimate complaint, you can wait for Marshal Harrison to return tomorrow and file it properly. Until then, I suggest you move along." The scarred man took a step closer, his hand moving toward his gun. "And who is going to make us, Cowboy?" "You." Before the situation could escalate further, Mrs. Chen spoke up. "I will get Miss Willa. She can tell you herself that she was not in the saloon." She hurried inside before Gideon could stop her. Gideon kept his eyes on the three men, watching for any sudden movements. The tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. Behind him, he heard the boarding house door open again, followed by soft footsteps. Then Mrs. Chen's voice came, urgent and worried. "Mr. Wade, perhaps you should come inside for a moment." Gideon backed toward the door slowly, not taking his eyes off the three men until he was across the threshold. Mrs. Chen grabbed his arm and pulled him further inside, closing the door behind him. "She is terrified," Mrs. Chen whispered. "Hiding upstairs. Says those men have been following her since St. Louis." "What?" Gideon felt a chill run through him despite the heat. Mrs. Chen led him to the staircase, where he could see a young woman pressed against the wall on the landing above, trying to make herself invisible in the shadows. Even from this distance, Gideon could see she was shaking. "Miss Willa," Mrs. Chen called softly. "This is Gideon Wade. He is a good man, owns a ranch just outside town. He wants to help." The young woman did not move at first. Then slowly she stepped into the light filtering through the upstairs window, and Gideon felt his breath catch. She was perhaps 22 or 23 years old, with long dark hair that had escaped its pins to hang in tangled waves around her pale face. Her eyes were the color of warm honey, wide with fear, and her green dress was rumpled as though she had been wearing it for days. But it was the bruise on her left cheek, purple and yellowing at the edges, that made Gideon's hands curl into fists. "Please," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do not make me go out there. They will kill me." "No one is going to hurt you," Gideon said firmly. "But I need to understand what is happening here. Are those men the ones who have been following you?" Willa nodded, descending the stairs slowly as though her legs might give out at any moment. "Two of them. The tall one with the scar and the younger one with the wild eyes. I do not know the third man. They worked for my stepfather in St. Louis. When I ran away, he sent them to bring me back." "Your stepfather," Gideon repeated. "Why would you run from him?" Willa's hands twisted in her skirt and her eyes dropped to the floor. "After my mother died last year, he said I had to earn my keep. He wanted to sell me to a cruel man who already had 2 wives buried. I refused, so my stepfather locked me in my room and said I would stay there until I agreed. I climbed out the window 3 nights ago and took the first stage west I could find." The story hit Gideon like a physical blow. He had heard tales like this before, of young women treated as property by men who should have protected them. It made his blood boil. "And the money they claim you stole?" "I took nothing from them," Willa said, meeting his eyes now with a spark of defiance breaking through her fear. "I have never been in a saloon in my life. They are lying because they know if they can accuse me of being a thief, people will not question them taking me away. My stepfather probably told them to use any means necessary." A loud bang on the door made all 3 of them jump. "Time is up," the scarred man's voice called from outside. "Send her out, or we are coming in." Gideon looked at Willa's terrified face, at the bruise that someone had already given her, at the way she was trying so hard to be brave despite being hunted like an animal. Something shifted in his chest, a fierce protective instinct he had not felt in years. "Go back upstairs," he told her quietly. "Hide in one of the rooms. No matter what you hear, do not come down until I come get you. Understand?" "What are you going to do?" Willa asked, but she was already moving toward the stairs. "What needs to be done," Gideon replied. He waited until she had disappeared down the upstairs hallway before turning back to Mrs. Chen. "Do you have a rifle?" Mrs. Chen nodded and retrieved a Winchester from behind the front desk. Gideon checked that it was loaded, then positioned himself by the window where he could see the three men outside. They were getting agitated, pacing back and forth and arguing among themselves about what to do next. Gideon opened the door and stepped out onto the porch, the rifle held loosely but ready in his hands. "The lady has nothing to say to you. She was not in the saloon, did not steal your money, and you have no legitimate business with her. I am giving you one chance to ride out of Independence peacefully. If you are still here in 5 minutes, I will assume you are trespassing with intent to harm, and I will act accordingly." The scarred man's face twisted with rage. "You are making a big mistake, Cowboy. You have no idea who you are dealing with." "Actually, I know exactly who I am dealing with," Gideon said calmly. "3 hired thugs who think they can terrorize a young woman because she dared to escape from a man who was trying to sell her like livestock. The way I see it, you are the ones who do not understand the situation. This is my town, these are my people, and that woman in there is under my protection now. You will not touch her." The younger man with wild eyes started to draw his gun, but the scarred man grabbed his arm. "Not here," he hissed. "Too many witnesses." He looked back at Gideon with cold calculation in his eyes. "Fine, we will go, but this is not over. That girl belongs to Calvin Vernon, and he paid us good money to bring her back. We are not giving up that easy." "Then you will be disappointed," Gideon said, "because she is not going anywhere with you today or any other day." The 3 men retreated to their horses, mounted up, and rode slowly out of town. But Gideon noticed they headed north, not east, back toward St. Louis. They were not leaving. They were just regrouping, waiting for a better opportunity. He watched until they were out of sight, then went back inside the boarding house. Mrs. Chen was waiting nervously by the desk. "Do you think they are really gone?" "No," Gideon said honestly. "They will be back, probably after dark. We need to get Miss Willa somewhere safer than here." "Where?" Mrs. Chen asked. "The marshal will not be back until tomorrow afternoon at the earliest. The hotel is no better than here, and there is nowhere else in town that would be more secure." Gideon thought for a moment, then made a decision that surprised even himself. "My ranch. It is only 3 miles out, and I have good walls and plenty of ammunition. If they try anything there, I will see them coming from a long way off." He climbed the stairs to find Willa. She was in the room at the end of the hall, sitting on the edge of a narrow bed with her arms wrapped around herself. When she heard his footsteps, her head snapped up, and he saw fresh tears on her cheeks. "Have they gone?" she asked. "For now," Gideon said, leaning against the doorframe. "But they will be back. I want to take you to my ranch where you will be safer. Can you ride?" Willa nodded. "I learned when I was younger before my father died, but I do not have a horse." "You can ride with me," Gideon said. "Gather whatever belongings you have. We should leave before those men realize what we are doing." It took Willa only a few minutes to pack her meager possessions into a small carpet bag. She had a change of clothes, a few personal items, and a photograph of a woman who Gideon assumed was her late mother. She held the photograph for a long moment before carefully wrapping it in a handkerchief and placing it in the bag. "I am sorry to be such trouble," Willa said as they descended the stairs together. I never meant to bring danger to anyone else. Maybe I should just go with them and save everyone the difficulty." "You will do no such thing," Gideon said firmly. He stopped at the bottom of the stairs and turned to face her, his voice gentler. "Listen to me, Willa. What your stepfather was trying to do, selling you to a man against your will, that is wrong. You had every right to run, and you have every right to your freedom. Those men out there, they are not the law. They have no authority over you. And as long as I am breathing, they are not taking you anywhere you do not want to go." Willa looked up at him with those honey-colored eyes, and something passed between them, a connection that Gideon felt like a spark catching tinder. "Why are you helping me?" she asked softly. "You do not even know me." "Because it is the right thing to do," Gideon said, "and because no one should have to face something like this alone." They said goodbye to Mrs. Chen, who made Willa promise to send word once she was safe. Then Gideon led her to the stable behind the boarding house where he had left his horse, a strong bay gelding named Copper. The horse nickered softly as Gideon approached, nuzzling his shoulder in greeting. "He is beautiful," Willa said, reaching out hesitantly to stroke Copper's neck. "And patient," Gideon added, swinging up into the saddle before reaching down to pull Willa up behind him. She settled awkwardly at first, not sure where to put her hands, until Gideon said, "You are going to need to hold on. Just put your arms around my waist." Copper has a smooth gait, but better safe than sorry. Willa did as instructed, her arms circling his waist lightly. Gideon tried not to think about how the contact made him feel, the warmth of her pressed against his back, the way his heart rate had kicked up a notch. He had not been this close to a woman in a long time. Not since Margaret had broken their engagement 2 years ago to marry a banker from Kansas City, claiming she wanted a man with prospects, not a dirt-poor rancher. He pushed those thoughts aside and focused on getting them out of town safely. They rode slowly at first, not wanting to attract attention, but once they cleared the last buildings of Independence, Gideon urged Copper into a steady trot. The ranch was northwest of town, good land with a creek running through it and enough grass to support the small herd of cattle Gideon was building. He had inherited the property from his father 5 years ago and had been working it alone since, pouring all his energy into making it successful. The afternoon sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon when the ranch house came into view. It was a modest structure, built from sturdy logs with a stone chimney and a covered porch that wrapped around 2 sides. Nearby stood a barn, a chicken coop, and a corral with 3 horses grazing peacefully. It was not much, but it was home, and Gideon felt a swell of pride every time he looked at it. "It is lovely," Willa said as they approached, and Gideon could hear the genuine appreciation in her voice. "It is small," he said, dismounting and then helping her down. "Just me here, so I never needed much space, but it is solid and defensible if it comes to that." He led Copper to the barn and unsaddled him while Willa waited near the house with her carpetbag. When he returned, he found her staring at the surrounding landscape, the rolling hills dotted with wildflowers and the distant line of trees that marked the creek. "It must be peaceful here," she said. "It is," Gideon agreed. "Sometimes too peaceful. Gets lonely without anyone to talk to except the horses and cattle." He realized how that sounded and cleared his throat. "Come on, let me show you inside. You must be exhausted." The interior of the house was neat and functional, with a main room that served as both kitchen and living space, a separate bedroom, and a small loft that Gideon used for storage. He had built most of the furniture himself, simple but well-made pieces that served their purpose. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and shelves held books, supplies, and a few personal mementos from his family. "You can take the bedroom," Gideon said, gesturing to the door. "I will sleep out here on the couch." I cannot take your bed, Willa protested. You have already done so much for me. You can and you will, Gideon said in a tone that brooked no argument. You have been through an ordeal and you need proper rest. Besides, I have slept on that couch more times than I can count. It is perfectly comfortable. Willa looked like she wanted to argue further but was too tired to put up much of a fight. Thank you, she said quietly, for everything. I do not know how I will ever repay your kindness. You do not owe me anything, Gideon said. Now I imagine you are hungry. Let me see what I can put together for supper. He busied himself at the stove, putting together a simple meal of beans, salt pork, and cornbread. It was basic ranch fare, nothing fancy, but it was hot and filling. While he cooked, Willa sat at the table and watched him with curious eyes. Have you lived here alone long? She asked. 5 years, Gideon said, stirring the beans. My father left me the ranch when he died. My mother had passed a few years before that, and I was an only child, so it all came to me. I worked as a hired hand on other ranches for a while, saved up enough to buy some cattle, and have been building the herd ever since. It must be hard work, Willa said. Running a ranch alone. It is, Gideon admitted, but it is honest work and it is mine. No one tells me what to do or how to do it. After growing up with my father, who was a hard man to please, that freedom means a lot. They ate in companionable silence, both too tired and overwhelmed by the day's events to make much conversation. After the meal, Gideon showed Willa where everything was, made sure she had water for washing, and then excused himself to check the perimeter of the property. He took his rifle and walked a wide circle around the buildings, looking for any sign that they had been followed. The evening was quiet except for the usual sounds of crickets and a distant owl, but Gideon remained vigilant. Those 3 men had not seemed like the type to give up easily, and he wanted to be prepared for any trouble. When he returned to the house, he found the bedroom door closed and no light showing underneath. Willa had apparently gone straight to sleep, which was probably for the best. Gideon secured the doors and windows, loaded his spare rifle, and positioned both weapons where he could reach them quickly. Then he stretched out on the couch, still fully dressed except for his boots, and tried to rest. But sleep came fitfully, his mind too active with thoughts of the frightened young woman sleeping in the next room and the dangerous men who were hunting her. The next few days fell into an unexpected rhythm. Gideon went about his usual ranch work, tending the cattle, mending fences, and maintaining the buildings, while Willa slowly emerged from her shell of fear. She insisted on helping around the house, cooking meals and tidying up despite Gideon's protests that she was a guest, not a hired hand. But he could see that the activity helped her feel less helpless, gave her something to focus on besides her worries. On the 3rd morning, Gideon rode into Independence to speak with Marshal Harrison, who had returned from Kansas City. The marshal was a grizzled veteran of the frontier, a former cavalry officer who had settled into law enforcement after the war. He listened carefully to Gideon's account of what had happened with the 3 men and Willa's situation. Calvin Vernon, you said. Marshal Harrison scratched his chin thoughtfully. I will send some inquiries to St. Louis, see what I can learn about him and whether he has any legal claim on the girl. But from what you are telling me, if she is over 21 and her mother is deceased, he has no authority over her. She is a free woman with the right to go where she pleases. She is 22, Gideon confirmed. Told me her birthday was last March. Then Vernon is in the wrong, and those men he sent have no right to take her anywhere against her will, the marshal said firmly. If they show their faces in Independence again, I will make it clear they need to move on. You did the right thing, Wade, protecting her like you did. Gideon felt some of the tension leave his shoulders. What about long term, though? If Vernon is determined to get her back, he could send more men. She cannot hide forever. No, but she can make a new life here if she wants, the marshal said. Change her name, establish herself as a member of the community. After a few months, even if Vernon's men come looking, they would not find any trace of her. Independence is growing fast, lots of new faces all the time. One young woman would be easy to lose in the shuffle. Gideon thanked the marshal and headed back to the ranch, stopping at the general store to pick up some supplies. As he was loading his purchases onto Copper, he ran into Thomas Wright, who owned the ranch neighboring his. Thomas was a good friend, one of the few people in the area close to Gideon's age. Heard you had some excitement in town a few days back, Thomas said, leaning against the hitching post. Something about standing up to some rough men over a woman. Word traveled fast in a small town. Gideon gave Thomas a brief version of events, leaving out some of the more personal details of Willa's story. Thomas listened with a frown. Those men were asking around yesterday, he said, trying to find out where your ranch is located. I steered them wrong, sent them south toward the river, but they will figure it out eventually. I know, Gideon said grimly. I have been expecting them to show up. That is why I have been keeping my rifles loaded and staying alert. You want some help? Thomas offered. I could bring a couple of my hands over, keep watch for a few nights. Gideon was touched by the offer but shook his head. I appreciate it, but I do not want to drag anyone else into this mess. Besides, the marshal says he will run those men out of town if they cause any more trouble. Well, the offer stands if you change your mind, Thomas said, clapping him on the shoulder. And Gideon, be careful. Men like that, when they feel disrespected, they can do foolish and dangerous things. Gideon rode back to the ranch with Thomas's warning echoing in his mind. He found Willa hanging laundry on the line he had strung between two posts near the house. Her dark hair pulled back in a braid, and her sleeves rolled up. She had borrowed an old shirt of his to wear over her dress, protecting it from the work, and the sight of her in his clothing did something strange to his chest. You did not need to do that, he said, dismounting. I usually just pile everything in a basket and deal with it when I run out of clean clothes. Willa laughed, a sound Gideon had not heard from her before. It was like music, bright and genuine. That explains why everything smelled a bit musty, she teased gently. I found your basket in the corner. I think some of those clothes had been there for weeks. Maybe, Gideon admitted sheepishly. Laundry is not my favorite chore. Well, it is done now, Willa said, pinning the last shirt to the line. And I also made a stew for supper. I found some vegetables in your garden and combined them with that beef you had hanging in the cold cellar. I hope that was all right. More than all right, Gideon said. I have been living on beans and cornbread for so long I had forgotten what real cooking tastes like. You are spoiling me, Willa. She smiled at him, and Gideon felt that spark again, stronger this time. Over the past few days, he had learned more about her through their conversations. She was intelligent and well-read, her mother having insisted on educating her properly before her death. She loved poetry and had memorized dozens of verses that she would recite while working. She had a quiet sense of humor that emerged when she felt safe, and a determination that Gideon admired deeply. She had been through something traumatic, but she was not letting it break her. And Gideon was starting to realize that his feelings for her were growing beyond simple protection and sympathy. He found himself looking forward to their conversations, to the way her face lit up when she talked about things she was passionate about, to the comfortable silence that had developed between them as they worked side by side. It was different from what he had felt with Margaret. That had been more about expectation and convenience, two people who made sense together on paper. This was something deeper, something that felt like coming home to a place he had never known he was searching for. That night, after they had eaten the delicious stew and Gideon had complimented her cooking so many times that she blushed, they sat on the porch together watching the sun set. The sky was painted in shades of orange, pink, and purple, and the evening air was finally cooling from the day's heat. "I spoke with the marshal today," Gideon said quietly. "He confirmed what I suspected. Your stepfather has no legal authority over you. You are an adult woman, free to make your own choices about your life." Willa was silent for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "I was so afraid he would find some way to force me back. He always said I was his property, that I owed him for taking me in after my father died." "You do not owe him anything," Gideon said firmly. "Especially not after he tried to sell you like chattel. What he did was wrong, Willa. You have every right to your freedom and your future." "What future?" Willa asked, and there was a note of despair in her voice. "I have no money, no family, nowhere to go. I cannot stay here forever imposing on your kindness." Gideon turned to look at her, his heart pounding. "What if you did not have to go anywhere? What if you stayed here in independence? The marshal says the town is growing and there are opportunities for someone willing to work. Mrs. Chen mentioned she could use help at the boarding house. Or you could find work as a seamstress or a teacher. You told me you have skills in both." "And where would I live?" Willa asked. "I have enough money for maybe another week at the boarding house, but after that." "You could stay here," Gideon said, the words coming out in a rush before he could second-guess himself. Not improperly. I could build a separate room, or you could have the bedroom and I would add on another space for myself. You would have your own area, your independence, but you would be safe and you would not have to worry about your stepfather's men finding you." Willa stared at him in the gathering darkness. "You would do that for me. Build onto your house so I could stay." "I would," Gideon said simply. "These past few days, having you here, it has been nice. The house feels less empty, less lonely. And I think maybe we have become friends. Friends help each other, do they not? Friends," Willa repeated softly, and Gideon could not quite read the tone in her voice. "Yes, I suppose we have become that. But Gideon, people would talk. A single woman living on a single man's ranch, even in separate quarters, that would cause gossip." "Let them talk," Gideon said. "Anyone who knows me knows I would never dishonor a woman under my protection. And anyone who does not know me well enough to trust that, well, their opinion does not matter much to me anyway." Willa reached over and placed her hand on his, a gentle touch that sent warmth shooting up his arm. "You are a good man, Gideon Wade. Better than I had any right to hope for when I was hiding in that boarding house, terrified and alone. I will think about your offer, I promise. It is more generous than I can properly express." They sat there in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge overhead, their hands still touching, and Gideon felt something shift between them. It was too soon for the word that kept trying to surface in his mind, but he could not deny what he was feeling. He was falling in love with Willa Vernon, and the realization both thrilled and terrified him. The peaceful moment was shattered by the sound of horses approaching fast. Gideon was on his feet instantly, his hand going to the gun at his hip. "Get inside," he told Willa urgently. "Lock the door and stay away from the windows." Willa ran into the house without argument, and Gideon heard the bolt slide home on the door. He moved to the edge of the porch, his eyes straining to see into the darkness beyond the circle of light from the house. 3 riders materialized from the gloom, and Gideon recognized them immediately. The scarred man, the wild-eyed young one, and the third man who had been with them that first day in town. They reined in their horses about 20 yards from the house, close enough to talk but far enough to be out of easy shooting range. The scarred man spoke first, his voice carrying clearly in the still night air. "We know she is here, Wade. We have been watching the place all day. You might as well send her out and save everyone some trouble." "You are trespassing on my property," Gideon called back, his hand steady on his gun. "The marshal has been informed of your harassment of Miss Vernon, and he has given me full authority to defend my land and anyone on it by any means necessary. I suggest you turn around and ride back to wherever you came from." "We have a job to do," the wild-eyed young man shouted. "We were paid good money to bring that girl back to St. Louis, and we are not leaving without her." "Then you are not leaving at all," Gideon said flatly, "because she is not going with you. She is a free woman with the right to choose her own path, and she has chosen to stay here. Your employer has no legal claim on her, which makes you nothing more than kidnappers attempting to abduct a woman against her will. If you try to take her, you will have to go through me." The third man, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "1 man against 3, Cowboy. Those are not good odds." "Good enough," Gideon said. "And I am not alone. I sent word to my neighbors when I saw you approaching. They will be here any minute with more guns. So unless you want to face down a dozen armed ranchers defending one of their own, I suggest you reconsider your position." This was a bluff, but Gideon delivered it with enough confidence that he saw the 3 men exchange uncertain glances. The truth was, his nearest neighbor besides Thomas was miles away, and no one was coming to help. But these men did not know that. The scarred man spat into the dirt. "This is not over, Wade. Calvin Vernon is not a man who forgives easily. He will send more men, and next time they will not be as patient as we have been." "I will be waiting," Gideon said. "Now get off my land before I decide that defending my property starts right now." For a long moment, the 3 men sat on their horses, clearly debating whether to push the confrontation further. Then the scarred man jerked his reins, wheeling his horse around. "Let us go," he said to his companions. "We will report back to Vernon and let him decide what to do next." "But you have not seen the last of us, Wade. That is a promise." They rode off into the darkness, and Gideon stayed on the porch for another 10 minutes, making sure they were really gone and not just circling back. When he was satisfied, he went to the door and knocked gently. "Willa, it is me. You can open up now." The bolt slid back and the door opened. Willa stood there, her face pale but her eyes blazing with determination rather than fear. "I heard everything," she said. "You should not have to face danger because of me." "Maybe I should just go with them, end this before someone gets hurt." "No," Gideon said, pulling her into the house and closing the door behind them. "You are not sacrificing yourself to appease a man who sees you as property. We will find another way." "What other way?" Willa asked, frustration creeping into her voice. "You said it yourself, they will send more men, maybe an army of men. How long can you hold them off? How long before someone does get hurt, maybe killed because of me?" Gideon took her shoulders gently, looking into her eyes. "As long as it takes," he said. "I will not let them take you, Willa, I promise you that." "Why?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Why are you willing to risk so much for someone you barely know?" The question hung in the air between them, and Gideon knew this was the moment to be honest, to say what had been building in his heart over these past days. "Because in the short time I have known you, you have become important to me," he said quietly. "Because when I look at you, I do not see a burden or an obligation. I see a brave, intelligent, beautiful woman who deserves every chance at happiness. And because, God help me, I am falling in love with you." Willa's breath caught, and for a moment she just stared at him. Then tears started sliding down her cheeks, and she was laughing and crying at the same time. "You fool," she said, but there was no heat in it. "You wonderful, impossible fool." I have been trying so hard not to feel anything for you, trying to remember that I am here because you are a good man helping someone in need, not because there is anything more between us. But I cannot help it, Gideon. I feel safe with you in a way I have never felt safe before. And what started as gratitude has become something so much deeper. I think I am falling in love with you too. Gideon felt his heart soar at her words. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close as she cried against his chest, releasing all the fear and tension and confusion of the past weeks. He stroked her hair and murmured reassurances, and when she finally pulled back to look up at him, he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her gently. It was a soft kiss, tentative and sweet, asking rather than demanding. Willa responded by pressing closer, her arms circling his neck, and the kiss deepened into something more passionate, more real. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. "We should not," Willa whispered, but she made no move to step away. "This is too fast, too complicated." "I know," Gideon agreed. "But I also know what I feel, and I do not think that is going to change. We can take this as slow as you need, Willa. There is no pressure, no expectation, but I want you to know that my offer for you to stay, it is not just about providing shelter. It is because I want you in my life in whatever form you are comfortable with." Willa rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "My whole life, men have tried to control me, to use me for their own purposes," she said softly. "My stepfather, the man he tried to sell me to, even those men out there hunting me down. But you are different, Gideon. You give me choices. You treat me as an equal. That is something I have never had before, and it means more to me than you can possibly know." They stood there holding each other for a long time, drawing comfort from the closeness. Eventually, Gideon reluctantly pulled away. "You should get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow I am going to ride into town and have a serious conversation with the marshal about getting those men arrested for trespassing and harassment. And I am going to send a telegram to St. Louis, see if I can find out more about your stepfather's business dealings. Knowledge is power, and right now we need every advantage we can get." Willa nodded and headed toward the bedroom, but she paused at the door. "Gideon, thank you for loving me. I know I am not an easy person to care about right now, with all the trouble I bring with me." "You are worth it," Gideon said simply. "Every bit of trouble, every risk, you are worth it all." The next morning, Gideon rode into Independence before dawn, wanting to catch the marshal early before the man started his rounds. He found Marshal Harrison at his office, brewing coffee on a small stove. The marshal looked up as Gideon entered, and his expression turned serious when he saw the look on Gideon's face. "They came to my ranch last night," Gideon said without preamble. "Made threats, said they are not giving up." Marshal Harrison swore under his breath. "I was hoping they would have more sense than that. Did they try anything physical?" "No, just talked," Gideon admitted. "But the threat was real enough. They said they would be back with more men if necessary." "Marshal, I need to know what legal options I have here. Can I have them arrested for trespassing? For harassment? Is there any law that can protect Willa from being dragged back to St. Louis against her will?" The marshal poured 2 cups of coffee and handed one to Gideon, gesturing for him to sit. "The law is on your side and on Miss Vernon's," he said. "She is an adult with no legal ties to Calvin Vernon beyond the fact that he married her mother. He has no guardianship rights, no claim on her person or her labor. If those men try to take her by force, that is kidnapping, plain and simple. And trespassing on your property after being warned off, that is also a crime I can prosecute." "But," Gideon prompted, hearing the hesitation in the marshal's voice. "But the law and reality do not always align perfectly," Marshal Harrison said with a sigh. Those men could grab her on the street in broad daylight and have her halfway to St. Louis before I could even get a warrant sworn out. Or they could burn your ranch to the ground one night when you are asleep and take her in the confusion. The law says they are in the wrong, but actually enforcing that law is another matter. So what do you suggest? Gideon asked, frustration evident in his voice. Honestly, I think Miss Vernon needs to disappear, the marshal said. Change her name, establish a new identity. I can help with that. And then she needs to get married, preferably to someone who can protect her. A married woman under her husband's protection would have a much harder time being claimed by her stepfather, especially if her husband is willing to defend his rights. Gideon's pulse quickened. Married, he repeated. I am not saying you have to marry her, Marshal Harrison said quickly, holding up his hands. I know you have only known her a few days. But if she were to marry someone respectable in the community, someone known to be a good man, that would provide her with both legal protection and physical security. Maybe that friend of yours, Thomas Wright, or one of the other ranchers in the area. No, Gideon said, the word coming out more forcefully than he intended. The thought of Willa marrying anyone else,